Hey guys, it's Nik the Booksmith. Welcome back, welcome back. For this video, I thought maybe it was time to do another junk journal primer. We have a lot of new ones that have subscribed, so I thought maybe it is time. And today we will be using a book cover from an old book instead of making one. And it doesn't matter as far as size goes because you can adapt any book cover that you have to make a journal or a junk journal, either one. So what are you going to need? Well, one, you're going to need a book cover, preferably one that already has the text block removed. If you don't know how to remove a text block from a book cover, I will link another video down below that shows you how to do that. So number one will be your book cover. You'll also need paper. Now you can use all blank paper if you would like to. You can use notebook paper. You can use sketch paper, whatever you would like. In the case of a junk journal, then those kinds of things would be book pages of all sorts and configurations. This is some ledger paper, already written on, of course. I bought this on eBay. It was this great big huge ledger and every page is written on, but it was really cheap and it's from 1948 and I just grabbed one of the loose pages. Also, here is some blank paper because I like blank paper in amongst everything else. These happen to have holes in them, as you can see. I got a ream of this at the thrift store a few years ago, so I thought, well, that's a perfect time to use that. A notebook with some grid work in it. It's a computation notebook, also from the thrift store. This is just some designer paper. It's not cardstock. It's not the thick stuff. It's not as thin as copy paper, but it's not thick like cardstock. So I thought that might be good to use. Here is another kind of ledger. Makes for some interesting lines to look at least. And I'm going to use some lightweight card. I guess it's card, or it's just heavy paper. You can choose how you want to define that. But I'll show you what I'll use this for, but a heavier piece of paper. And this is a scrap of manila folder. So I'll need that. You'll need some scissors or craft knife, something like that. A pencil to mark measurements, straight edge, ruler type thing. Some glue, needle and thread, a scrap of cotton fabric. This is an old bed sheet, and perhaps something for the headbands, which could be some bought headbands, some homemade headbands like this one, or even a scrap of fabric or a stretch of lace of some kind. And I'll show you why that is preferable as opposed to no headbands, at least as far as I am concerned. Okay. First things first, let's figure out the size that our pages need to be. If you open up the book cover, you will most likely see, at least in most books, where the end sheets were pasted down to the inside of the cover. This is a good starting point. However, in most books, you're going to have a little bit of a curved spine. So your paper is actually, your pages, when they're folded, they will actually extend back into the spine a little bit past where you see your end papers in here. And if you hold the book up on end and put a ruler of some kind in there, you can push the ruler all the way to the back, and then you can open it up and look at it. And if you measure to the edge of this end paper, mine says 137 as far as 137 millimeters, except that's going to be a little bit longer than what you need. However, you can always trim them down later if you would like to. So we should write that down. I'm going to write down, let's see, we said 137, right? I'm going to write down 135. And that is going to be the folded size. So if you doubled that, that would be 270 opened up. Your book will be different. Now for the height, this part's easy because you can just measure pretty much the height of whatever this end sheet is. And this one is 196. So this is a piece of paper that I have cut to be 270 millimeters in length, and then the 196 for the height. That is my guesstimation. And maybe you like your pages bigger and hanging out the edges. Maybe you want them quite a bit smaller and inside the cover. Whatever you'd like, you can make that adjustment as you see fit. But this rule of thumb is generally a good way to estimate the size that your pages need to be. Now there is a caveat to that, because if you're making a junk journal, if you've ever seen one before, they have all kinds of random sized pages sometimes, or can. So just note that whatever you measure out, like the method we just used, that will be the largest your page needs to be. Anything can be smaller than that, or narrower, or shorter, whatever, but this is the biggest size that I will need. So I'm going to keep this for my reference. And the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take the stack of papers that I have somewhat trimmed down, and I'm going to start folding all of these and stacking them together to make my signatures. Alright, so now I have folded up the papers that I want to fold up that I think will somewhat fit inside the book. I ended up with 6 or 7 pages per signature. I like to put a plain or full-size page for the very center, just for ease of sewing it later into the binding. So just an FYI as far as that goes. And when I'm folding up the pages, I don't line them all up and then fold them together when I'm doing a junk journal, because I don't know how the pages are gonna fall. Sometimes they get pushed because they're not all the same width. So when I'm folding up the pages, I'll just take each page and fold it in half, but just very lightly. I just give it barely a crease. And then that way, when I get my 6 or 7 or 5 or 10 or however many pages you want per signature, I stack them the way I want them, and then I can crease them all together once they're collated and stacked together. Does that make sense? Then they stay. They stay where they're supposed to be. All right, so the next thing is I'm going to grab a piece of this graph paper and one of my signatures, and I'm going to kind of guesstimate here where I want my stitches to be. And I usually go in about, half an inch from the top and half an inch from the bottom, and then I'm going to make 2 more marks for holes. And as long as you have an even number of holes, it'll turn out right. Just don't have an odd number or your binding won't turn out correctly. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to do those. Probably can't see that, so I shall make circles around them. There we go. And I will take a pokey tool and mark those, get those holes poked. Also going to mark a T up at the top so that I don't get my template confused as to its direction. So this is the template that I'm going to use to open up each signature to the center, and then I can transfer the holes from the template through all the pages of the signature. And every single one gets done that way. So now all the signatures have the holes poked into the folds. Okay? Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a piece of that manila file folder, and this piece is going to be the same height as your book pages, and it needs to fit inside the width of that spine liner that's in your book cover. Now, if your book doesn't have a spine liner, find one that does. You don't have to, but it's so much easier if it has one, because then you can gauge what your spine width needs to be. And this piece needs to fit inside that spine liner. It can't go over, so I usually cut it just shy to where you can see the edge peeking out on either side of the manila card. If you push it in there, the spine liner is just like 1/2 millimeter wider on either side. If it doesn't have a spine liner, usually you can get away with measuring it out somewhat. So do you see how there is about, I don't know, a 5 millimeter gap between the edge of the book cover, the board itself? So if you measure from the edge of that book cover board, not the end paper, but if you feel the board in there, measure 4 or 5 millimeters in this way and 4 or 5 millimeters in this way, then whatever's left in the center, that's what you can work with. That's your width. Okay? But find one that has one of those things. Okay. So now I have my piece of manila card, and the measurement on this one was 30 millimeters, which means the center is 15. So I'm going to mark at the 15 at the top and the bottom. There is our center. Now, do yourself a favor, and if at all possible, try to end up with an odd number of signatures, because it'll just be easier in the long run. Because then this way, the center line will match up with one of the signatures. And then you'll have an even number of signatures on either side. In this case, it's 3 on either side. If I had 5 signatures total, then it would be 2 on either side. You get the drift. Make this a little bit darker. So what I like to do personally is I like to put my first and last signatures about 1 millimeter or 2 from the edge of this card. So that takes care of the center signature and then on either edge. And now we need 2 more. And I guesstimate. And I try to split the difference between these 2 lines to space out the other signatures. And I'll grab this handy dandy ruler that has the grid lines on it because it can help me to line that up. Now that I've made that guesstimation, I can continue down the card. That's not too bad. If you want to measure it out, be my guest. I need to take this, I'm going to mark the top on that with a T as well. And I need to transfer places for the holes so that I know where that's going to go. So there we go. And then you can either do that for each line, or if you are a rebel like me, then you can guesstimate again. I get a lecture from my grandfather at this point. Remember I told you to get some scrap fabric? I'm just going to use white, but you can use whatever you like. And you need a piece of fabric that's about 4 inches wide and about the same height as your spine backing card paper thing that we just made. That was very, very poor job indeed. I shall straighten it up now. I usually leave it just a little long and then trim it down later. So now we've got this piece of fabric. And now this card is going to get glued down to the center-ish of this fabric. And this is just white glue, just PVA. And I'll take this brush. And while you don't need to glob it on, it needs to be coated from side to side and top to bottom without leaving any dry spots. And I'm just going to guesstimate the middle. Smooth that out, make sure it is all stuck down. And if you see any places where it looks like it is pulling up, like it didn't stick, you can lift the fabric back a little bit and dab some glue in there. And I can let that dry for a few moments. Once that glue is, well, mostly dry, somewhat dry, I'm going to take a large needle and I'm going to poke those holes all the way through the fabric on the other side. Once that is done, then I'm just going to take a needle and some thread. I'm going to use gray so you can see better what I'm doing. I'm going to tie a knot a couple of inches from the end of the tail, just enough so that it won't pull through. Now you can start sewing in your signatures with the first signature or the last signature, whatever you'd like. I usually start with the first one. So at the bottom hole on that first signature row, I will thread the needle through, grab my first signature, and thread the needle through that bottom hole, and then back out through the next hole up, and then that goes through the corresponding hole in the fabric. Pull that snuggish. Now I go all the way up to this one, and then into the signature, and then back out through the top hole, and then through the card. Yeah. I'll make sure that thread is tight, but not tight enough to rip the card. And I'll tie a knot just for securing that first signature in, and so that it doesn't loosen up while I'm sewing in the rest of them. So there is the first signature all sewn in. To sew the second one in, we go to the next row over that top hole and pull the thread through, grab our second signature, and we'll go in through the top and then out through the second one, and then through the card, and then down to the next hole down, and then through the signature, and then out through the bottom. And now while it's down here, I have this tail, and so I'm going to tie off with that tail, and that way secures both of them, top and bottom, like that. So there's the second one. And we will sew all of these signatures on in the same way. We just skip over to the next row, whatever sewing hole is on the same level as where you're at. Grab the next signature, and we're starting at the bottom this time. So in through that bottom hole, then out through the next hole up, through the card, pull that snug, and then out through the next one up, through the signature, and then out through the last one at the top. And I usually grab this middle thread, and that's where I give it a nice pull and make sure that it's tight. And again, I will tie a knot up here. You don't have to. You can snug everything up at the end if you want. You know, I probably have enough thread to do the next signature, so I will go out through that next row at the top and grab my next signature. Just make sure that you are sewing them on the right side up. And then out through the next one down, because it really sucks if you sew them all on and then you realize that some of them, or even just one of them, are upside down. That just really, really sucks. Especially when they're sewn together, a lot of them at least, with one long thread. And then out through the bottom. Grab this middle stretch here and make sure that that is taut. And since we're down here, I will tie it to that bottom tail again. I'll take another piece of thread, and you can tie it on however you'd like. If you want to use a weaver's knot, or I mean, whatever. I'm just going to do a simple square knot of sorts. And then I will continue sewing on all the signatures just like I have here, and then tie off at the end. So now everything is sewn to the card and the fabric piece here. And I trimmed the fabric to the edge of the card, and then I beveled it on either side down just a little bit. So now is when we can finish up these little edges right here, and that's what the headband is for. And basically all the homemade stuff is a piece of twine glued inside a doubled up piece of fabric. You could also take a piece of, I like this crocheted trim because it's kind of flexible and you can fold it up. You don't even have to put twine in it. So that's what I'm gonna do. This is also just PVA, but I put it in this bottle that has a needle nose tip on it. I'm just gonna run a little glue along the edges so that they don't fray. And then fold that over. Grab this bulldog clip and now I shall take another one.
One eternity later.
Put glue on all but about the top third, because you glue it on to the back and you just want it to peek over the top just a little bit, just to hide that edge. All right, that is both of the headbands added on. Now we can do somewhat of a dry fit. That's going to work. There is our headbands that hide the raw edges of the edge of that card. It just looks better, I think. Back of that card fits down into that recessed spine area, and because we left the elbow room between our signatures, then as you can see there's plenty of room to add our additions. Now at this point you can decide, you can look at the edges of the pages and see if you want to trim them down if they stick out too far against the edge of the book. Now would be the time to do that. Before we insert our text block, I'm going to take that heavy designer paper or light cardstock, whatever, and I'm going to cut 2 panels to fit on the inside. And I'm going to want them to be the height of the end papers or a little better. I'll say about 198. And then the width needs to be the size of your board inside, and then just shy of the edge. I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to say 130. Because you want it to end up on the inside edge of like these end papers do. So 198 is going to be about right there. I'll go ahead and trim that. So that should be about the right height, and it is. And then we want 130, which is about right there. And that's good. And trim this one the same. And the other thing I want to do is make sure that these end papers, the old ones, are trimmed back. Get my plastic plate back. This will need some more glue. Get your text block and set it inside. It needs to be down in that spine. And then make sure that it is even from top to bottom. Somewhat. And in order to hold everything in place, let me grab a little pair of these pliers. What I'm going to do is I'm going to twist this so I twist one of these so that it is facing the other direction, and then that way I can put this in here without spreading apart those pages too much, because if you left these the width they were, they wouldn't fit in between the pages. So I'm just going to put it in the middle of the middle signature, and then that way it doesn't shift, hopefully, too much. And then you can open one side up. And I'm going to grab a piece of plastic. If you have any transparency sheets or, you know, that kind of thing. These are just from a notebook, as you probably gathered. And now I'm going to brush some glue on the back of this fabric piece. Don't be stingy, but don't leave any big like pools or anything. And you want it to go all the way to the edge. And you can take that plastic and use it to fold that back. Take a piece of, I've got all kinds of plastic, put this piece in here and close that up and turn it around, and then I can do the other side. And if you're wondering why I'm not using paper, I'm using a strip of fabric. And that is because you can use paper as your little backing and then attaching to the inside of the book cover, but I guarantee you it won't last half as long. It probably won't even last a tenth as long as a piece of fabric. And again, that, fold that over. And you want to, while the cover is folded back, make sure that that fabric is nice and smooth against the inside of the cover. And here's another piece of transparency. I can close that. I'm going to take this bone folder and reinforce down in that groove right there. And we can allow that to dry, at least most of the way, before we finish up. Sound good? On the panels that we cut, I'm going to line them with some double-sided tape on the back. And these can be glued, of course. But I'm a fan of tape when I can use it. If you're going to use double-sided tape like I am here, you need to make sure that these are completely dry. All right, I'm going to take off just a couple at one end. So that I can line this up. Because for me, the important edge is going to be this edge here. And then I can remove the remainders. And then I can do the front. All right, well that is basically it for the main construction of said junk journal. All the pages are different sizes, everything's been sewn in, and it's ready for the owner to finish up. I will put in another video some of the things that you can do to make additions to the pages before you put any kind of memorabilia or keepsakes or, you know, ephemera in. So that will be in another video, so that those of you that just wanted to know the basic construction, if you want to stop here, you can stop here and I won't torture you through the embellishing process. How's that? I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it gave you some ideas. And if you have an old book if you have a book laying around that you can take the cover from and put your own pages in it, because there's only so much you can do with a 30-year-old accounting textbook, right? So take those pages out and put your own in and put it to some good use. I mean, it's not like you're going to be going for that MBA in accounting. Am I right? All right, guys, I hope everybody is having a great week, and I will see you really, really soon in the next video. Bye, guys.